to Eugene's 5th Climate Town Hall. We made a pledge to the city of Eugene several years ago when we began saying, you need some policy to get some climate action happening really soon here because there's an emergency. And they said, we're working on it. We said, well, are you going to engage the community? And they said, yeah. And so it wasn't happening and it wasn't happening. And so we said, we're going to do it. And together with the Unitarian Church and the United Methodist Church and the other partners in town, we are starting really good engagement and seeing some real progress now in the city and have made some wonderful friends and partners. And some of them are here today in the organizations you see tabling here. So in between things, quietly, we hope you'll engage with those folks throughout the day. But there will be plenty of time between moving to teach-ins that you will be able to visit and get materials and talk to those folks. So without any further ado, at this time, I'd like to introduce our first musical guests. They dress like harmless little old ladies in silly, extravagant hats with aprons and shawls, which lends them their charisma and power. They courageously travel in gaggles and bring us familiar tunes with original lyrics that critique the injustices of the day and offer creative and often hilarious solutions. Please join me in welcoming our very own Eugene Ratie Grannies. Take it away.
Our first song is a call and response, and the Grannies are going to proceed in calling and responding to my calls. But you are all welcome to join in this call and response. It's short, and you all know call and responses. It's very, very easy. Are you ready? Yes. Love our planet, keep it cool.
Love our planet, keep it cool.
Do not be a fossil fool.
Do not be a fossil fool.
Let's stop burning gasoline.
Let's stop burning gasoline.
And keep our planet clean and green.
Keep our planet clean and green.
Let's pass on the gas so the air smells sweet.
Let's pass on the gas so the air smells sweet.
And electrical car just can't be beat.
An electrical car just can't be beat.
So next time we say fill her up,
So next time we say fill her up,
we'll be talking about our coffee cup.
we'll be talking about our coffee cup.
So next time we say fill her up,
So next time we say fill her up,
we'll be talking about our coffee cup.
we'll be talking about our coffee cup. You're concerned with climate change because of the bad weather. How in the heck can we fix this mess if we don't work together? Our leaders are all talking now, their vested interest showing. Instead of snow on mountain tops, we'll get a verbal snowing. Our Congress says we can't afford the cash to fix things now. They can put away taxes, take away taxes, but that's a sacred cow. Woo! Wind and solar get dismissed. Some say they're not reliable. If we had the ocean's tides, this would be more viable. If you're concerned with climate change because of the bad weather, how in the heck can we fix this mess if we don't work together?
Is it Daisy? Okay, you got your Daisy, so you got to get our hats. Hats on this one.
Okay.
Costume change.
Costume change. Wait. Does everybody have their Michael cap on? Yes. Okay. You can go first. Come on, Michaels. Singing, oh, aren't they beautiful daisies with their daisies? Oh, they look so pretty. Okay. Daisy, Daisy,
Marry me, say I do. We'll make our getaway on a bicycle built for two. For every mile we don't drive, we'll help to make our earth thrive. We won't have to hike or ride a bike. Our environment will love you. Michael, Michael, I'd like to ride your bicycle, but it's freezing. We will need one big icicle. And what about your mother, my sister, and my brother? They're coming too. Didn't I tell you? So your bicycle will not do. Listen, Michael, we have a different plan. Let's get an electric car, soon to be in demand. We won't spew out CO2, and we can save our hairdo. Just plug it in, and we all win. In our EV, we'll feel just grand. Back it up. Going down the road feeling sad. Driving this old gas guzzler is bad. Breathing dirty air just makes me mad, mad, mad. Don't want to be feeling this away. Going where they sell those cooling bees. Cars that don't pollute the air we breathe. Ride them out and pick the one I please, please, please. Just want to be driving this away. I like the way it costs less to maintain. Car repairs can really be a pain. Gas goes up and that drives me insane, insane, insane. Just want to be feeling this away. E-bike by yourself need something sweet. For your commute that really can't be beat. Charge it up and buzz on down the street, street, street. Just want to be driving that away. All the EVs are so fun to drive. They take off fast, it makes me feel alive. Pick the good one, give me about my 5, 5, 5. Just want to be driving this away. Just want to be driving this away.
What's next? Pass on the gas. Pass on the gas. Pass on the gas. That's your props for passing on the gas. Okay. We're going to pass on the gas, pass on the pumps. Say goodbye to Exxon and the other greedy chumps. Leave the oil in the soil, leave the gas in the ground. Let's switch to electric, there's enough to go around. We're gonna spark in the dark and pass on the pumps. Exxon and Mobil can blow it out their humps. We're gonna go electric and pass on the gas. Shell oil and Chevron can blow it out their ass.
Stop and makes that sound. Everybody look what's going down. There's something happening here. It's time we see it all clear. Climate is in code red. If we don't change now, we'll all be dead.
It's time we stop. Oh, what's that sound? Fire burning all around.
The ocean is warming fast. Icebergs no longer last, hurricanes whipping the ground, waters rising, islands drown. We've got to stop.
Well, what's that sound? Floods are wiping out the town.
Big oil gets the big bucks. CO2 it produces just sucks. Time we turn it around. Let the oil and coal stay in the ground. It's time we stop.
Well, what's that sound? Pipelines going shutting down.
We must work together to stand for the planet, the air, and the land. All creatures, all life depend on we humans now to defend. So let us
Stop. Well, what's that sound? All our voices now resound. Stop. Well, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
They're gonna sing themselves out with a little number. We're fully insured, I believe.
We need to wake up.
We need to rise up. We need to open our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. We're on a planet that has a problem. We've got to solve it, get involved, and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. Make it greener, make it greener, make it greener, make it cleaner, make it last, make it fast, and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. No point in waiting or hesitating. We must get wise, make no more lies, and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now.
Thank you, Eugene Grannies. Welcome everybody again. My name is Patty Hine. I'm your MC for the day. This is Eugene 350's fifth Climate Town Hall. We're really glad that you all could make it today. There's going to be lots going on and will be a little bit of confusion, but I want you to know that there are schedules and maps that are particularly put in strategic places in the hallway if you're wondering, or anyone here with a yellow vest, raise your hand. They are your helpers and answer people, and they can help show you to all the facilities, which are really great here at the Campbell Community Center. Let me tell you a little bit about what is also going on outside. The Arcimoto company. Do we love Arcimoto in our community or what? Last October, we rented their entire fleet and took rides around the community out to Springfield and West Eugene and South Eugene and all around. And we intend to do that again. I hope you will join us. That was fun. Arcimoto and some EV owners are out with EVEVA, the Emerald Valley Electric Vehicle Association. They are a local chapter of a national organization who won first prize this year for their chapter work. So that's EVEVA, that's what we call them. So they have EVs out there, and there's also some electric bike displays. So we're all about electrifying our buildings and all about electrifying our transportation. That's where about 70% of all your emissions come from. And that is what we are dead set to stop happening. So you can let me know when you're about ready. This, my friends, and then you can listen casually. This is Ratie D. We enjoyed her 2 years ago at a Climate Town Hall, which was our last one here in March of 2020. She is a Zimbabwean vocalist, composer, and dreamer who aspires to bring vibrancy and love through her music. Please join me in welcoming Ratie D.
Thank you so much for being here, everybody. We're going to try and make this work. The first song that I'm going to be sharing today is called Kolite. And Kolite means golden. And in this song, I'm just speaking in a native language. I'm singing in a native language called Ndebele. And in this song, I'm just sharing how all the challenges that you may face in your life actually shape you into being an awesome person that you are right now. So it can be challenging, but just know that you can make it, okay? You know you try to love sometimes and people take advantage of you, you know that? Yeah. You are so golden, go to Mando Unide, Mando Unide. Sama ang kizio, utada ang kizio, sakson kera utatela bansi, utatela bansi. Ate sama ang kizio, utada ang kizio, sakson kera utatela bansi, utatela bansi. Ate sama ang kizio, utada now. Ate sama ang kizio. Don't forget that you are golden, no matter what happens to you, yeah. Don't forget that you're so golden. Thank you so much.
Hello.
The next song is Woman of Africa. It is a celebration of all the women of uncelebrated, it's a celebration of all the uncelebrated women of Africa. And this is for you. Hey. I won't hide the truth I told you. Please don't fear that I'll never hold you. Every woman has got a plan made of gold. It's time to recite stories that have never been told about the women of Africa. So strong and bold, they're women of Africa. truth I know. Based on fear that I'll never hold. Every woman has got a crown made of gold. It's time to recite the stories that have never been told about the women of Africa. So strong and bold, they're women of Africa, woman of Africa. Be proud of who you are. Oh, release your character. Be proud of who you are. Oh, release your character. Don't be shy to sing if you want to. Don't be shy. Now you know you haven't shown the road to freedom, nothing can bring you down. Now you know you have the power to take yourself from the struggle, take the chains, 'cause you are a woman, woman of Africa, so strong and bold. You are a woman, woman of Africa. Now you know you haven't shown the road to freedom, nothing can bring you down. Now you know you have the power to take yourself from the struggle, take the chains, 'cause you are woman, woman of Africa, so strong and bold. You are woman, woman of Africa. Oh, be proud of who you are. Release your character. Forget those women, they work so hard, you know, selling the little bit that they have to send their kids to school. So we remember those women and we celebrate them. Even if they're not teachers or doctors, they're still so amazing. The next one, yeah. The next song that I'm going to be sharing is called Kudara. And it's a song that talks about how when I was younger, I used to dream of performing before people. And here I am, so I'm really thankful for this opportunity. Thank you so much for having me. out for the music, it was part of me, it was my love. But I didn't know just how I was to get each time I sing out loud, someone would say, now here I am reminiscing on the olden days. Now here I am reminiscing on the olden days. As a child I fall in love, music is part of me, it was my love. But I didn't know just how I was to get each time I sing out loud, someone was extra. Now here I am reminiscing on the olden days. Now here I am reminiscing on the olden days. Singing down 친구라 우리가 왕이 친구라 구다란 미친미기 구다란 왕이 친미기 날 수위하고 바다 이미 수위하고 바다 이미 그구 바다는 스위던 눈 나랑 미티야티네 나랑 미티야티네 나랑 미티야티네. Anyone would like to dance with me? Yeah, it's okay, you can dance. Oh, great. My heart's beating in rhythm with the music. A little bit without the hill I see. Oh, my heart's beating in rhythm with the music. Oh, will I see? Will I see? Ooh, down beat, let's go. Hey, down beat.
Let's have another round of applause for them. It's time to pair the Grannies up with other groups, don't you think? Greetings, everybody, and we're starting off the formal part of the program, so if I can have your attention for just a few minutes and then we'll turn you loose. We have some really special guests here. We have a really special guest speaker for you here today, and I want to make an introduction. And I also want to recognize some special guests who've arrived. And I called out to our elected officials and invited everyone. And I was so glad to see the faces that I see. Eugene, Mayor of Venice, Lucy Venice, we're so happy to work. I'm so glad to be working with the city of Eugene on some really good and shockingly wonderful climate policy. Also from the Eugene Water Electric Board, our commissioners, Mindy Schlossberg, we're having we are big fans of these two women on the board, and we like a couple of other ones too. And we know that they are going to do some good things for us in the electrical department, which is the whole focus of this town hall today. Thank you both for coming, all of you. Is there anyone else here I've missed who might be elected officials who have, I don't know, snuck in under the, yeah, no. Okay, well, you can let me know. I am Patty Hine, I am your MC for the day. Today we're going to be sitting in here till about 2:40, but in the meanwhile, I want you to be sure and listen to the following.
Listen for a bit, you know.
It's important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us to reside in this land, and to seek to understand our place within its history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in the past tense, because colonialism is an ongoing phenomenon. And we need to cultivate mindfulness, don't we, of this fact, and strive to heal and repair that horrible damage. It's vital to honor this history, because it has not been taught to us in an honest way. Now is the time to recognize the importance of indigenous culture and how much they have to share with us in this moment. Today we acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional ancestral territories of the Kalapuya-Uilihi people, who lived and cared for the lands we now call the Willamette Valley. We express our gratitude as guests and thank the original and current stewards. We acknowledge that indigenous lands were taken by violent, genocidal means, fueled by greed and wanton disrespect for treaties. For that, we extend our deepest apologies along with gratitude to the Native peoples of this area. Well, it's been just over 2 years since we had our last town hall and last in-person event. It is good to see you all. There is no possible way to describe the tumultuous 2 years that have passed, and the changes that have occurred, from Black Lives Matter, and COVID, drought, and wildfires, and now Ukraine. This moment that we inhabit together is at once full of dread and promise. Communities like ours, with strong leaders and good grassroots groups, are rising and actively and strategically confronting the climate crisis. Our work is to engage with inspiration and education, and to bring about the transformational change that we must have take place if we are to have a stable climate future. What we need to do is to stand together, because we're stronger that way. That's how we build our power, and that's how we demand the action that we need. On this 52nd anniversary of Earth Day, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. We owe a lot to the heroic activism of the tumultuous 60s that produced the first Earth Day in 1970. At the time, pesticides were in our food supply, the air was choked with smog, our drinking water tainted by pollutants, rivers ablaze, and our national symbol, the bald eagle, was nearing extinction. President Nixon, bless his heart, signed the Endangered Species Act and created the Environmental Protection Agency to watch over our clean air and water. And while all that bipartisan support didn't get us everywhere and everything that we needed, we still have a long way to go, but that was a very good way to start. And that's what we're here today, to carry on, to pick that up and move this mountain. Because we have a mountain to move and we don't have as much time as we like. Each of us is picking up a stone. Each of us is carrying our stone, because each of us can do something. And we know we're strong together. And remember, they just have the money. We have all the people. And we have the love. I'm honored to introduce our event keynote speaker, Aimee Okotie-Oyekan, an artist, land use planner, an environmental justice organizer, originally from Lagos, Nigeria. Her work rests at the intersection of environmental science, planning policy, and storytelling to advance the excluded communities in environmental narratives and protect the frontline communities and broaden their representation. Most recently, she has worked as the climate justice strategist at Reach Collective and the environmental climate justice coordinator for the Eugene Springfield branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. While at the NAACP, she organized for the passage of Senate Concurrent Resolution 17, a land use and transportation planner she now is at the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. We are so fortunate to have Aimee in our community. Please help me welcome Aimee Okotie-Oyekan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for showing up today. It's a really beautiful day, and I even wish this was being held outside. And thank you to Patty and Deb and the other organizers at 350 Eugene for inviting me out to speak today. And I received this invitation a few months ago after several cancellations and reschedulings, and I've been doing these talks for the past year, and my first reaction when I received the invitation was like, dang, y'all ain't tired of hearing me talk yet? so I really appreciate the space today. My name is Aimee Okotie-Oyekan. I use she, her pronouns. I've been living here in Eugene since 2018, and I moved up here from the Peach State, Metro Atlanta, Georgia. And my two honest-to-God impressions when I stepped off the plane was, wow, everything is so green here, and the air straight up smells like weed. So just a little bit about me. So I came to University of Oregon, to study a Master's of Environmental Studies and Community and Regional Planning. And I now work as a land use and transportation planner at the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. And so I think critically about our built and natural environments and how really since the onset of colonialism, they've been very intentionally constructed to perpetuate inequality. And so now I'm thinking about how we can use planning as a tool to maintain an ethical and sustainable balance of land uses that suits and meets Oregon's diverse populations and their needs. As Patty mentioned, I'm also an environmental justice advocate, and I define environment very broadly to include our homes, our jobs, our places of worship. And I believe access to clean air, clean water, accessible and culturally appropriate public and private spaces, affordable transportation, and of course a stable climate are all basic human rights that shouldn't be denied to anyone. And finally, I'm an artist here, and I ran into Patty yesterday, and they called it my secret life, but hopefully it's not so secret anymore. But I really do love using media and art to disrupt harmful narratives and advance environmental justice. And if you didn't catch it yesterday, over in Cottage Grove, the Opal Center for Arts and Education held their annual Trash and Show, where designers get to create pieces out of trash. And I had the honor of modeling a piece by Mitra Gruel. She is owner of Discard Upcycling, and the piece was made out of discarded tablecloths and food wrappers to bring awareness to food waste. So that was an interesting experience, and I hope you get to catch it next year. So I'm very fortunate to be able to bring all these different pieces and slices of me forward in my organizing with various groups like 350 Eugene, with the Fossil Free Eugene Coalition, Beyond Toxics, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Springfield Eugene Tenants Association. And we're really doing the work to form intersectional coalitions that are fighting for a just transition off of fossil fuels in Eugene and the broader Linn County. And just the same, I hope you all are able to find safe spaces where you can bring all the parts of you forward in your work. So when I say a just transition, we're talking about a shift from an extractive economy to a living and regenerative circular economy in a way that uproots the colonialist worldviews that were responsible for creating the climate crisis in the first place. It's asking, when I ended up last summer in the emergency room after the heat wave induced a lupus flare-up in me, it's asking, why are Black women predisposed to illnesses that would make us more vulnerable in a rapidly heating world? In terms of electrification, it's understanding who is least served by our energy, housing, and public health systems, and how do we address their needs as we electrify our homes and buildings, which are currently the cause of 1/3 of the state's climate pollution. It's important to recognize that this work happens at various scales. And I look to the work of environmental justice scholar David Pello, who teaches at the University of Santa Barbara. And he says that environmental injustices play out across various geographic and temporal scales. And we have the ability to zoom in and out. We're able to understand better how these injustices play out, and in the same way, be able to identify the different leverage points for which we can act. At the global scale, it's important to understand, it's important to look at and understand who's potentially paying for our shift to clean energy here with their lives, land, and labor. If our actions to advance clean energy and electricity is at the expense of people's lives and livability, that is not a just transition. Those are false solutions. And I'm talking about the extractive tendencies that come along with the shift to clean energy. At a community scale, it's important to understand that there is so much power when we move together. We cannot fall victim to the illusion of separation and individualism that is a fatal characteristic of the dominant white supremacist and exploitative systems. We must move together, and the most effective way to care about our earth is doing it with our friends and families, community members, classmates. So when you're giving public comments, speaking to your council, hosting an art benefit show, demonstrating, make sure you bring your friends along. And finally, the third scale is the individual. It's important to know that healing starts with you. Lauryn Hill says, how are you gonna win when you ain't right within? Each one of us has the opportunity to look inward and do the inner work to interrogate where we individually have internalized ableism, xenophobia, homophobia, racism, all the things. You should see your life as a front line, as Adrienne Marie Brown says. Every day, every human and non-human interaction is a beautiful opportunity to be in practice, intentional practice, modeling the systems of care, love, reciprocity, grace that we're all fighting to build. What we practice is what we are. And I think this is what gives me the most hope, that each one of us being in intentional practice, each one of us being in intentional practice and modeling the systems we are fighting for and starting where we are. And that's all I have for you.
All right.
Any speech I've ever heard her give, it's always very intellectually grounded and in just rooted love and basic goodness. It's great to run into you down in Cottage Grove doing your secret life. But we love these informal teach-in opportunities because then you can really get down and dirty with the people who are doing the presentations. And so we have really very good fortune today to have 3 impressive presenters. And so I would tell you where they're going to be and what and so forth. Are you up for some teach-ins today before you go out beer drinking? Yeah. In this room, we have a senior campaigner from the Sierra Club, our own Plummer. Dylan, raise your hand. Dylan's going to be holding up a chair up here and sharing with you the pros and cons of electrification. I like to call that presentation gas pains. Because he's going to talk a little bit about how that is and how we are going here in Eugene to doing things and why we need to be doing it. I mean, we're the first city in the state of Oregon to really get as far as we are with the electrification campaign, and we're really proud of that. And we're going to race, and we want to get there as soon as possible. So that is why we're here today, really pushing. This is part of our Electrify Everything campaign that we started in February, really back in November, when the city council said, yeah, I think we'll start doing that. So here we are to keep the community engaged and informed and inspired to make this thing get over the finish line here this summer. So that's what we're doing here. Dylan's going to be here talking about the pros and cons of electrification. There will be 2 presenters down in the far hall, so you just have to walk down to the old main hall if you're familiar with the center. And that is where are you going to be down there, or is Matt going to be down there? Matt Lutter will be down there talking from EWEB, thank you. Both of our favorite people from EWEB are here to talk about their incentives for clean energy here locally. It's quite astonishing what we got going here. So that's one. And then the other presentation down there will be our very own lawyer from Australia, Danny Noonan, who is a breach collective attorney who knows the legal process that's been deep and wide to try to help our city navigate this kind of new territory where we're trying to have a managed decline off of methane gas. Why do we need that? Because methane is the best thing we can get rid of first so that we can deal with carbon dioxide, since it's so powerful and so strong, and it's spiking right now. So we got to get a grip on that. So 2 presentations down there simultaneously in the same room. Dylan will be here, and then there are 10 tabling organizations here that we really want you to take a good look at, who are partners and have been doing this work together with us.
What new loads or what new generation will come on, but for the most part, it's going to be there's a large build out of wind and good amount of solar that's expected and will continue. And yeah, along with conservation, we should be able to meet the loads.
So what are some of the incentives for residential solar that will address the very thing that's being mentioned here, that people can just basically fuel their car off their own roof? So where does that stand?
Right, so we do have incentives to help with the cost of solar for homeowners if they'd like to install that. Right now that's funded through something called our Green Power program. So customers who pay a little extra for their electricity help fund solar installations, help fund these rebates that we offer for solar, rooftop solar.
There's some commercial businesses in town that have not been able to put in solar because there's a 25 kilowatt limit on the number of panels that they can put on their roof. Why does EWEB have that limit, and are you looking at getting rid of that?
So that limit is more for where there's a net meter involved. A net meter is a meter that's required if you do have solar on your as part of your connection. A net meter can go backwards, basically. And so when the meter goes backwards, it records how much electricity is being generated and fed into the grid. And so that's a typical part of smaller solar installations. For the bigger ones, those are just metered differently. So it's really just a metering issue where the larger over 25 kW systems, those just get a generation meter, and it wouldn't go forwards and backwards. It would just record the generation. If that makes sense.
So there wouldn't be any credit for the solar coming off the roof, is that right? Or?
There would be, yeah.
Okay.
EWEB would pay for the generation.
Yeah. And is there a limit to those, the size of those systems?
I don't believe so. No.
So does it feel like there's enough adequate incentives for businesses to put up bigger, like about 25 kW? Excuse me, I don't know the lingo as well as I'd like to. Is there adequate incentive for businesses to put that on there now, or is EWEB thinking about that?
So EWEB, we actually have plenty of electricity and we're not actively looking to recruit more generation from the community in the form of solar.
Okay.
So, yeah, we don't have a lot of incentives to promote more solar because we've got a lot of hydropower resources and other resources to serve the electricity needs now. So, but we do have some incentives for nonprofit businesses and for homeowners, households.
But there's not an endless supply of hydroelectric power. It's getting all used right now. So if our demand goes up because everybody's electrifying, the percentage of your power is going to be less from hydroelectric, right? Because you can't just, could you say we need more hydroelectric power and you get it?
No, you're right. There's only so much
There's only so much.
that the region can
So when
share.
people start electrifying, let's say I put solar panels on my roof, what's the chance it ends up being like in some of these other states where then they want to charge me $125 a month to backfeed my electricity through my net meter because of course I'd be using the grid like you do and pay for it. And that seems like an exorbitant amount of money to charge people that are generating a little bit of solar power. But what's your, if somebody were to do that, what do you guys see in your future about charging residential customers or not if they have solar panels on their roof?
Yeah, so that's not something that's in the forecasted future that we would change the policy for solar customers.
Yeah.
And yeah, right now the policies, we offer the net meter, and
Yeah, you're looking forward to people doing that.
right,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
So I'm Tony Carlson, I'm an EWEB commissioner, and so lots of the questions that you're asking are things that we're grappling with right now. We're actually going through an integrated resource planning process to see how the demand is going to meet the needs and where the energy is going to come from. And so it's been a long time coming, but that is what we're looking at right now because we do want to make sure that we have enough resources to meet the demand, and we know that we have to get off of fossil fuels. That just has to happen. At the same time, we have climate change that's drying out our rivers and such of that nature. So they're very big issues. There are things that we're grappling with. We are looking at how we plan for this because we know we have to. So, and when we ask about some of the solar and how we pair that, it's about the time of use too. So we can have solar, but then you have to have a way to store that energy to match when the need is. Right now, we're still a winter peaking utility. So when we have the greatest demand, and when we're actually going out in the market and we don't have enough supply, it's in the winter time. So when he's talking about going after efficiency in the homes in the area, that still actually gives us a big amount of energy there because our homes are very inefficient. So that actually gives us a lot more pull there. Now in the summertime, it may be fine for a residential person to have a solar panel on their roof, but is that when they're charging their vehicle? So if you're charging your vehicle and everybody gets home at 6 p.m., where is that energy coming from? So there's a lot of great questions here. I really appreciate how you're looking at, and these are things that we're looking at right now as a board too. So sorry, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Just about climate change, I'm sure you've read the Oregon Climate Assessment Report that came out recently. It's pretty frightening. They're predicting up to 5 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050, and a sharp decrease in precipitation, snowpack, and stream runoff. The Oregon Department of Energy is saying the same things. So by 2050, we need to be prepared for a sharp decrease in the hydroelectric. And we really need to start preparing now because developing solar infrastructure takes time and money and resources. We can't wait till it's OSHA time. So are you folks talking about those sort of issues and preparing for the future?
Yeah, I mean, as we look at the IERP, the Integrated Resource Electric Plan, that's going to be the plan for how we match those together and how much of what kind of energy we need to match the demand. It's not, like I said, there's so many different moving parts, but it's a big push of what we're looking for right now.
Excuse me, how long is the IRP? How often do you
It's supposed to
update?
be a 10-year, but what obviously we're seeing is more volatile energy markets, different changes. So it's going to be a 10-year, but it's going to be updated every few years. That's my understanding.
Yeah, and I feel that that would
Yeah.
be good because
You have to do something, right, and then test it and see how it's working.
you just don't know what's going to be in 10 years, and if it just stays the same.
Yeah, no. We don't have the ability to do that anymore, to let that sit and not look at it. It's not a set it and forget it. That's not the situation we're in anymore with energy.
Good.
An article from Reservoir 2 months ago concerning the source of electricity. It stated that in 21 we burned 20% more coal than we did the year before, and we're now burning more coal than ever. Seems to indicate any new demands put on the system is going to come from coal.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Shouldn't we be getting new systems online that will do what we want? Nobody's planning. I think I've found one solar farm on the books. And Eugene, that's it. 600 megawatts, that's all. Where's all, I just can't see where all this electricity is coming from. Nobody's designing the system to support it. You're putting the demand, you're demanding demand, but you're not demanding the source.
right. So there, like Sonia had mentioned, that's part of the planning to figure out where the electricity will come from and how much we'll need. And yeah, my part of it is trying to reduce the demand across the whole community so that there's less electricity being
But the
used.
effect of electrifying Eugene is increasing the demand.
Right. So there's a balance. There's increases in one place, and then we're trying hard to decrease the demand in the rest of the community.
How are we doing that, decreasing the demand?
Yeah, so we've got lots of incentives about to encourage heat pumps and insulation for homes and businesses, upgraded windows.
That's been around for years, so it has, I mean, people have done it, but
There's quite a bit of opportunity still in our community to improve efficiency so that we don't need as much electricity.
What percentage of our electricity is from non-green sources now?
Yeah, it's about 10% comes from right. There's a little coal and natural gas.
Yeah, aren't there a lot of, it seems to me, I recall in the last 20 or 30 years, there were quite a few generators that were based on gas to create electricity in the state of Oregon. Is that true? Seems like I remember that from maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the resources are located, but yeah, we get a lot of electricity from Bonneville. There's some coal and nuclear and natural gas generation in by the Bonneville system.
And do you guys consider nuclear clean?
Don't really have a
say what's
position.
our clean version, or what percentage is clean versus not?
Right, I can't remember. Right, there's 90% green electricity. I can't remember if nuclear is in that. But if there's not a whole lot, we've got a graphic somewhere. I think I've got it.
Has anybody looked into the new systems coming out? The totally radical from the old power plants are basically 7-year technology. There's now 2 new technologies coming out. One in the initial stage of building them. Has anybody looked at this? You have a molten salt reactor, highly efficient, and you don't have 100 tons of uranium sitting there ready to go down. You actually use thorium, which is uranium reactive, and you create your fuel as you burn it. So there's no huge quantity of fuel here to go. Self-regulating, if the furnace overheats, basically there's a plug in the bottom, it melts out, and everything is down in the pit. It loses its ability to fluctuate. Is anybody looking at the economy?
Yeah, I think that's part of planning process.
Bill Gates is building one right now. Terra Power is building the other, a modular unit which is quite small. So gearing the size down to where they're manageable, where you don't have the threat of a boiler explosion. All failures of atomic power plants were boiler explosions. You created so much heat, the boiler blew up. 3 Mile Island, I lived there when that happened, and it didn't blow up. Why? Because they turned the water off. They had a lot of water going into the reactor, and they turned it off, so there was no water there. It just melted down there and sits for 30,000 years. So atomic reactors are not the problem, it's the design of it. And you have to have water continuously flowing in. When you shut the water down, you got problems. The reactor in Russia blew up. They did the same thing, shut the water off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's...
Designs, why aren't we looking at this? Why is the EWEB looking at this?
I think there are a lot of different power generating resources that are out there, and we're planning on considering all the options. Can't really commit to. That's not part of my expertise to speak to that. So.
Yeah, they're also looking at geothermal, for instance, if maybe again Oregon giving it another look. Also, I was wondering what's the current and maybe proposed status of the power supply from the Mackenzie River.
Right. So we do have we're fortunate to have a robust hydro system up in Mackenzie, the Carmen Smith system, and that's doing great. There are some issues with the Leeberg system. The canal has some concerns, so they're still looking at what the options are.
What's the percentage of the power from Carmen Smith?
I think we get something like 20% of our power from that, I believe, that ballpark, but the Leeberg one's a bit smaller.
Right.
Is there going to be any opportunity for community input into the IRP process?
We meet every Tuesday, or not every Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month. And we're going to be talking about it. You can go on the EWEB's website and you can see what the agenda is. For the next 12 months, we have multiple sessions, and we'll be talking about the IRP. So please come down.
Okay,
Are you talking about an IRP committee?
No, we have the integrated resource plan, and we have the board will be reviewing.
What is meeting every Tuesday, or is that?
Sorry, no, it's not, sorry. The first Tuesday of the month, the Eugene Water and Electric Board meets, and we'll be getting reports back from staff. It's not every single one of those meetings, but you're welcome to come down if you have feedback that you want to share at any of those meetings. And also get information when those plans are presented. We're actually recording them online, so you can join via Zoom. So we'll continue that too.
Is there any idea of when the board's going to have in-person meetings again?
We actually have been meeting in person the last couple of times. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you can.
We're now meeting at the Rock though. We're not meeting at the headquarters.
So it's a hybrid meeting. So people that don't want to be around, people are going to be online and Zoom come. Thanks.
Yeah.
I was just a little curious if you've looked into this. We just got solar panels on our house, but we didn't do the battery system at the same time because it just wasn't cost effective for us at that moment. And I know that a big part of solar is having the battery system to go along with it. So I'm wondering, even over the next 10, 15 years, would it be a better investment for like the individual homes to do battery storage, or for EWEB itself to have more battery storage with it when it comes to solar, so it can be used during the peak times? Is that on the mindset? And I'm just curious if you know.
Yeah, good question. That's on our radar. Batteries have their pros and cons.
Right.
We're fortunate to have this hydropower system, which serves very much like a battery.
Sure.
And so that as you generate electricity when the sun's shining, when the sun goes down, we can actually smooth those peaks out with the hydropower system, which works great.
So right now at current capacity with the amount of water flow, it is a smooth system. So no need really to look at battery power yet.
Well, yeah, we do have some peaks that will as those peaks get bigger, there may be more reason to look and incentivize perhaps battery storage. We're not there yet, but yeah, that's.
Again, some of the challenges with winter peaking, so when we have to go and buy out on the market to meet the demand, it's usually in the middle of a cold snap. We have snow on the ground, so I'm not sure that the solar panels are actually going to be working at that point. So that's part of the challenge for us. I mean, we're all very committed to doing work around climate change and making sure, but part of what we've done around doing the plug-in and the electrify and supporting that to switch to electric vehicles is to take up some of this energy that we have because it's available when you demand it. And so looking at solar, it's not necessarily right now how people are using it. So we have to match the supply with the demand. Now, again, as we're looking at this IRP system, it's looking at how will that demand change over time? Because if the climate changes here and we look more like California, they have summer peaking, and we're starting to see more summer peaking. So as we look out over the horizon, it's making sense to change some of that over time. But we have to get the data and the information back and have staff go through modeling to give us the best information. Because we don't want to make bad decisions for the community. We want to make really clearly informed decisions that can help. And I wanted to know one other thing with the rental market. So you're saying that we've had these incentives around for years and years. We have. However, the rentals in this area, terrible. And we're trying to work with different groups to make sure that because think about it, if you're a homeowner and you own it, the person who's living in the home actually pays the electricity. So there's not that there's no incentive, but there is a much lower incentive for many to actually do that work. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can incentivize rental owners to upgrade those units to the benefit of that community too. It's one of the top things that we as a board have said that we're going to work with the city on, and also around building codes and such. So just there is a lot of opportunity out there on efficiency.
Yeah.
Hi, does the utility own any green power or any alternative power projects at this point? Are the only projects that are renewable on the McKinsey? Because I know Wyoming wind plant's been sold, the hydro in other states, they had small hydro, that's all been sold off. So do they own any smaller or commercial size?
Well, you mentioned the McKenzie River. We do have.
Other than the McKinsey?
Other than that, I think there is a wind power facility in, like you said, Wyoming.
No, that was sold.
Well, I think there were a few sold.
And what's the percentage of the power mix that comes from those other renewable projects?
I think in total, EWEB generates about 25% of the electricity that we deliver. I'm not sure how much comes from, I don't think there's much coming from outside the river. I think there still are some facilities that we have a share.
Many communities are doing something that you're probably familiar with, community solar. So if your house doesn't have good solar, you can buy into a solar project. They're putting them on big buildings like in Ashland, where you can buy a few panels, and the community can buy into that. What's EWEB's kind of position on community solar? Because the 25 kilowatt limit really kills that type of project, which is flourishing around Oregon.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a position on it. There's a way that people can contribute to solar in the community is this green power program. Not quite what you're referring to. I think there's been some explorations about a community solar program, but we don't have a need really for that kind of resource. So you know, haven't really been incentivizing it. I don't know if Sonia, you have anything more about community solar.
We haven't talked a lot about that. I think we've been
Yeah.
really focused on the IRP and kind of what we need first. So then it's how do we match that? We've had a lot of questions about percentages. I remember those numbers offhand. I had to look them up here. So carbon-free resources, we have 91%. 81.4% of that is hydro. Nuclear is 9.3% of that. Solar is 0.04. So the carbon emitting, this is mostly unspecified purchases. These are purchases that we have to go make out onto the market where we don't have control of those resources. That's 7.1%. Of the fuel types that we own, looks like hydro, ownership type. So we have 83% of our power is contracted, mostly through the BPA, and then the other part is 17% owned.
If costs go up significantly for energy usage over the next decade, is that going to factor and change things in the IRP that you're talking about?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
It seems obvious, but you know.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Well, and with some of the coal plants going offline, which yay, that's great, but it also means that we need dispatchable resources to meet demand. So we're looking at regionally. We're hoping that not everybody is planning to go out on the market to get those resources, because that will mean that prices will really spike. Right now there's that dispatchable. It's kind of a base load support, but as that goes away, how regionally are we supporting that?
And
Okay.
what's the definition of region? Is it British Columbia on down into Montana? What's the region that you're talking about? Is it the WECC grid, or what's the definition of region if you're looking at power?
That's generally speaking. Bonneville's region is a little different. It encompasses just the watershed of Columbia, which I think does go into. But yeah, the western
electric. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I just wanted to look into putting solar on the house, and it was a 25-year payback period on it. And I see one of the biggest problems is EWEB does not pay you very much any surplus power, which I think 3.5 cents a kilowatt. Why doesn't you give more incentive to pay more for the electricity created on solar, which is where our goal is?
Well,
If you would pay me 8-10 cents, then it would be, I can get that down to 15 years.
Right.
In 25 years, in 25 years, I have to pay them to come back tear the solar system off, put a new roof on, and put the solar back on. So it's not ending.
Right. So if all of the solar generation each month is used in a household, then basically you get the retail rate. But if you're right, if you generate more in a month than you use, we basically purchase the electricity as if we're purchasing from any other buyer, which is a lower rate. So that's the
We're trying to promote solar, so you have to make it economical, but we put solar.
It's a tough balance because we don't want to use ratepayer funds to buy what would be a higher price electricity resource. So it's a
Isn't it
tough one.
6.7 cents?
Yeah, it has gone up. It was 3 cents. I think it's gone up to 6 or so.
It changes with the prices on the market.
Yeah.
That's only in the winter. It varies from winter to summer.
3.5 is winter and 6.5 or something like that in summer. But the winter's when you don't have the surplus. The summer when you don't have the surplus. That's when you get bigger.
We don't need it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's unfortunately when we don't need it.
Like more acceptable. 25 years means acceptable.
Yeah, solar is not it's not cheap.
It would be
It's
tough
a
to
big
get
investment.
everybody to do it because it's not cost effective.
The price is coming down in panels, and
Not a lot though.
No, it keeps going down, it's going in a downward direction.
Yeah.
Lithium-ion batteries, he said, claim the price continues to go down.
And I'll anticipate that as those prices come down and it is more cost effective, that, you know, more people will be able to do it, we would have more incentive in it. This is why, again, we're focused on electric vehicles, because that one is one that we can better match the demand. The costs are more in line. It's more economical for the people in the community, and it has a much bigger change, because right now it's our energy is so clean. Getting more solar in it is not really going as far as switching from a gas vehicle to using the electric resources we have. So we're getting a bigger bang for our buck. And I have to watch out for that, because there are a lot of people in the community that cannot afford, you know, they live paycheck to paycheck. And if I'm paying that money out, that's getting paid by the rest of the people in the electric system, right? And some, you know, again, people live paycheck to paycheck. I got to watch out for them too. So we're trying to do the best with the limited resources we have and get the biggest bang to get climate change in check by using those dollars where we can get the biggest change.
And I'm also hearing you say on repeat that really reducing the use would really be a good investment in time and energy, as opposed to, at this moment, more solar. Is that what I'm really understanding? So really looking at like those rental houses and all those other legislation pieces that can be done to make sure people better insulate and get better windows, et cetera, to use less.
Yeah. It's, conservation is a big part of this problem. We need to ramp that up.
Right.
Do that part too.
So it seems like there's a bit of a contradiction in that the payoff or what you benefit from by saving energy is you get your rates raised. So what was the reason that the commissioners raised the rates this last time? And is it going to be a year-on-year rate increase, or is it going to be once every 5 years, or is there any plan for that? But what's the reason that the rates are being raised if people are successfully conserving energy?
Do you mind? So,
Save it by the bell.
okay, well, I'm happy to answer that when we get out there, but basically, we didn't raise rates for 5 years. We did a lot of work to not raise rates. We actually decreased rates on the water side. So this year was the first time that we had to raise rates. And part of that is, you know, cost of doing business has increased. But we did a lot of work to really make sure that we were not raising rates for a long time. And we will have, because we have a lot of work up in the McKinsey and others, we raised rate, we did a charge to do water protection at the McKinsey.
Yeah, that's not a rate, that's a surcharge. I'm talking about the actual electric rates are going to continue to ratchet up, and people are asked to conserve. So it's a really tough sell. When you conserve it, then your rates keep going up. So that's all I'm saying.
Well, that's actually an incentive to.
Right. Conservation is something you want to do to manage your bills regardless.
Yeah.
That's always it's an opportunity.
Thank you.
I'd like to make my own personal contribution to improving the quality of the planet, cutting down on my own fuel consumption, and in every area that I can do a better job. And that's why I came today, to see what electric vehicles can do so that I can do a better job, trade in my gas guzzling truck and step up to this electric vehicle.
Okay. Did you get any info here today that helped you make up your mind?
I've talked to a lot of people, including you, and I've gotten a lot of good information. Some good, some surprising.
Yeah.
But again, starts with information. Here I am, and hopefully it leads to my new electric vehicle.
Yeah. What's the most surprising thing that learn today? The most surprising thing?
About electricity, the burgeoning desire for people to move towards electric conveyances, whether they're bicycles or the RC Moto or a true electric car. I'm happy to see that. So what's the best thing to do right now with the money that I have? And that's to get rid of the gas guzzler. Hey guys, and switch to electric.
Great.
So I've been asked to do a presentation on essentially what's happening around building electrification at policy at the city level and what some of the legal considerations and strategies are likely to be moving forward. Patty described me as an attorney. I just want to give a quick disclaimer that I'm not an attorney in the United States or the state of Oregon. I'm an Australian qualified lawyer, but I'm not qualified and I'm not in fact giving legal advice today. The opinions I'm giving are just regular person opinions, lay opinions, and they're based on public information and research that has been conducted by attorney colleagues, and I'm just relaying that information for you today. So just from that to one side. How many of you live in Eugene? Everyone? Or just
I live in Springfield.
Springfield? Minneapolis, right on. Okay. So this is pretty Eugene-centric. It also talks about Oregon. It talks a little bit about California too, as one of the states where cities and counties have moved forward, but a lot of the framing of this presentation as I've structured it is around Eugene. So because we're a small group, I just encourage you to put your hand up or whatever else it takes to get my attention and ask questions, and I'll try and read the room and move quickly through things that might seem a bit dry or less interesting as we go along. But what we're talking about is, in terms of the framing for this presentation, is first some motions that were passed at a November 2021 work session by the Eugene City Council. And these are the motions here. And they're essentially given rise to two policy workflows within the city, if you will. So the first of these is for, and this was the motion that was passed, was to direct the city manager to schedule work sessions to discuss changes to city code that would require all newly constructed commercial, residential and industrial buildings to be electric only beginning 1st of January 2023. We're going to talk about this as the new buildings electrification mandate, as that's what it is. It's essentially exploring the idea of mandating the new construction being 100% electric. The second policy pillar is that the city manager provide council with a roadmap for how Eugene can achieve decarbonisation of existing commercial and residential building stock by 2045, with particular consideration of how low-income and historically marginalised households will be impacted and included in this process. This roadmap must include strategies for decarbonisation of rental housing stock, and a draft shall be provided to council before June 30, 2022. I'm going to talk about that as a 2045 roadmap. I did not have a lot of time to talk about it last time, so most of the material does focus on the first part, but if folks are really interested in the second part, we can spend a bit more time on that in the session. Just see how things go. And so then last, well, it wasn't last Wednesday now, it was 2 Wednesdays ago, on April 13th, City Council held its first work session on these policies, and specifically focusing on the new buildings electrification mandate. And for those who didn't watch that session, essentially what occurred was there was a lot of questions and issues raised, and council resolved or moved to have a further work session on this in late July, which for some people was a bit disappointing, but I guess the bottom line takeaway is that building electrification policy is still on foot in the city, and they're just taking longer to sort of work through some of the issues than we were hoping they would. So that's where things are at currently. The rest of this presentation is going to focus on how we got here, some of the sort of broader policy frame, architecture and history around building electrification in Eugene, and then having a look at where we're going in terms of what a new buildings electrification mandate might look like in Eugene, and also what's going to happen with that 2045 roadmap and what some of the issues are to consider. And then if there's time, we'll talk a little bit about what we can do as individuals and collectively to support these campaigns, to support these policies. So in terms of that sort of broader history of climate policy in Eugene, a useful starting point is the passage in 2014 by the city of the Climate Recovery Ordinance, also known as the CRO. And this ordinance was updated in 2016, and it includes some pretty ambitious goals, one of which is to reduce fossil fuel use community-wide by 50% by 2030, and another one is to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions in accordance with a 350 parts per million scientific prescription, which was estimated to require 7.6% reductions sort of year on year between 2016. Extremely ambitious, probably one of the most ambitious in terms of its targets of any city in the US. However, the city has not really been on track to achieve that. And so another process that's been occurring with the city is the update of their climate action plan. So in 2010, the City of Eugene passed a community climate and energy action plan, and then sometime later, in response to the CRO, they started to update that plan, and that became the Climate Action Plan 2.0, or the CAP 2.0, which was finalised in the summer of 2020. And during that process, the city released a document called the CAP 2.0 Additional Strategies, which was trying to identify different policies that they could implement to essentially bridge the gap between the city's current emissions and the goals of the Climate Recovery Ordinance. So that's where a lot of the policy work has sort of been directed within the city. This is a screen shot from the Additional Strategies document, and you can see that regulating natural gas is one of the key strategies identified, and in particular, there was reference to prohibiting new infrastructure in the right of way. So the point here is that dealing with expanding gas infrastructure in the city has been on the city's mind for a while, and that there has been a particular interest or focus in tackling building emissions, which is where a majority of gas emissions and increased gas emissions in the city come from. Now, did some of you attend Dylan's talk before? Okay, so you've probably heard a bit more about the sort of facts of why gas is bad. And, yeah, so this has already been discussed already, but gas emissions, they're a significant percentage of gas consumed comes from buildings in the US and in Oregon. It's a rapidly expanding source of emissions, according to the American Gas Association. Nationwide, there's at least one new connection every minute, which is insane. And gas is a problem from a climate standpoint, not just because the emissions are increasing, but because they are methane emissions, much more potent heat trapping gas than carbon dioxide in the first couple of decades of its lifetime in the atmosphere. This is a screenshot from, and don't worry about reading it right now, I'll walk you through it. City staff has presented this to council at the April 13th work session. Just the key thing to underline here, and this is the first time we've really had this data, is that of new buildings that had permits issued in 2021, specifically of 1 or 2 family dwellings, there was 230 buildings that got new buildings that got permits issued. 83% of those had gas hookups. So in Eugene, it's the vast majority of new residential buildings, at least single and multi-family homes, or rather single and 2-family homes, are being hooked up to gas. And this is core, this rapid expansion is really core to Northwest Natural's business strategy in Oregon. The rationale is that the more homes that it can get hooked onto gas before regulation eventually does sort of materialize, then the more difficult and costly it's going to be to remove that infrastructure versus if the buildings were just all electric from the beginning, and therefore the longer that Northwest Natural can continue to operate as a fossil fuel company in a state that has long-term plans for decarbonisation. Yes?
How can they not even know what cooking works up to? I mean, they got fireplace there. Why don't they know what cooking was?
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure why they don't have that data in the city. I think maybe because they don't, it's perhaps not something that they require a permit for stovetops. I don't know. And this slide is just showing that there would actually be a benefit from converting to all electric buildings. And this is a pretty common industry talking point that, oh, do we even know that we'll actually be reducing emissions if we switch to electric heating and cooking appliances? In Oregon, we absolutely would be, because the grid is already has a high percentage of renewables in it. And we've also done this work's also been done at the Eugene level by Electrify Now to show that there are emission savings from switching to electric heating, switching to electric cooking appliances. There are a few states where that isn't the case, including, I believe, Minnesota, is that right? North Dakota and Minnesota, yeah, sorry. It's because the grid is, I think, is probably dominated by
Nuclear?
No, I think it'd be dominated by fossil fuels up there. I mean, I don't know if that's because of the shale oil in North Dakota or what, but yeah, or what they're getting down from Canada. But yeah, it looks like it would reduce emissions in every state except North Dakota and Minnesota. It says where the grid is still very dirty, so it's a dirty grid. So that's the climate threat of building emissions. But gas emissions also pose a more direct health impact in the home through the leaking of various other noxious gases, nitrous oxides, carbon monoxide, etc., etc. Some studies have shown that, I believe it's nitrogen dioxide levels from running a gas burner very quickly exceed levels that outdoors would be in violation of federal law. They're not a violation indoors because that's not what the regulation covers, but the industry does challenge these studies. They haven't accepted the science, they're in denial, but there is a pretty strong body of scientific literature on the health risks here, and some pretty strong anecdotal evidence as well that I've seen. So that's the factual basis for regulating gas use. And I'm now going to talk about how the city has tried to address this issue prior to sort of moving towards this mandate. The first attempt that they spent sort of around about 2 years on was trying to use something called a franchise agreement as leverage for securing a essentially voluntary emissions reduction commitment from the utility, from Northwest Natural. franchise agreements are contracts between cities and utilities. This also includes like communications companies and things like that, that govern how they build and operate infrastructure in public rights of way. And it's in place of a sort of piecemeal, case-by-case sort of permit process. So it's advantageous for utilities because they don't have to get permits every time, and they have certainty in terms of what the fee is and things like that. It's advantageous for the city in that there's less work. And what the city thought they'd be able to do is say, okay, you know, we'll agree to this on favourable terms if you will reduce your emissions by X% by this by this date. And basically what happened was Northwest Natural just kept saying no. They wouldn't agree to reduce their emissions as a condition of granting this new franchise agreement. And so after some targeted advocacy by the Fossil Free Eugene Coalition and other engagement on this issue, and I think after several city councils just kind of got fed up with how they were being treated by Northwest Natural, the city decided to let the agreement expire in February 2021. It was around this time that the city started to move towards more of a direct regulatory approach and started considering the idea of sort of mandating new electric construction as a way to achieve the emissions reductions that it needs in buildings. And so now that we're talking about this mandate, the precedent for it is California. There's already been dozens of cities in California that have done this. There's, I think, over 60 nationally, but I think the majority of them have been California. This is just a map showing a bunch of the cities and counties that have passed those bans and the different types that they've passed. And the city staffers have actually recently put together some interesting information on this as well. It's in the agenda packet for the April 13th work session. I doubt many people spend their evenings looking up agenda packets for work sessions, but if you are interested, it's in there. And because Eugene's the first city in Oregon to really get this far, as Patty mentioned, there's a question here which is, okay, these cities in California obviously think that under California law, they have the authority as cities and counties to regulate in this way. Oregon's a different state. System of federalism means our states have different laws. Louisiana is based on French law. Oregon is not. Just as an extreme example, so does the authority exist in Oregon? And different states have different case law too, which in a common law system, law develops iteratively based on court decisions. So it's a fresh question whichever state you're in as to whether a policy that a city or county has passed in one state is going to fly legally in another state.
Are there a bunch of lawyers working on that in Oregon these days?
Yeah, there are. There are, thankfully. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that potential authority might be in Oregon. The starting point for this is recognizing that in Oregon, thanks to some amendments to Oregon State Constitution that occurred over 100 years ago, Oregon is what's called a home rule state, which means that local governments such as cities have general legal authority to govern themselves unless they are told otherwise by state or federal statutes. Some states have it the other way around, where they can't govern for themselves unless the state legislature has specifically said you can regulate in these areas, and they sort of prescribe the areas. Oregon's the other way around. It has this general authority to sometimes referred to as police powers, which I've never really liked that term. In Australia, we call them peace, order, and good government powers, which I like a bit more. Maybe not the order part, but at least the peace and good government part. And so that's an inherent source of authority that local governments have in Oregon. And in a letter that we sent to City Council back in April 2021, so over 12 months ago now, we suggested two potential legal avenues that might exist under Oregon law to prohibit new gas hookups, to mandate electrification. The first is that home rule authority I just talked about, and specifically the authority over public health and safety matters. As we just talked about, there's, there's the less direct public health and safety risk of greenhouse gas emissions, and then there's the sort of more direct public health and safety risk of sort of noxious respiratory affecting emissions from gas appliances. So that's one source of authority. The second is authority that's actually granted by the state legislature to cities in Oregon, which is the right under this Oregon statute, section 221.420, subsection 2, which I'm sure you all remember from high school civics or something like that, which gives Oregon cities the authority to exclude or eject any public utility or heating company from public property and rights of way, which we think would potentially have the effect of preventing or severely limiting the expansion of gas lines if something were to be passed under that authority, because essentially utilities rely on being able to construct gas infrastructure under roads and rights of way. I've lost count the number of times I've had on my bike or something had to sort of reroute myself around the city lately because Northwest Natural's doing some kind of maintenance or some other work. So
Hurrying up to get as many lines in as we can.
So we think that the city may have the authority, specifically under that statute, to pass an ordinance if they wanted to. And those are non-exhaustive, and as I mentioned, some colleagues of mine are currently working on sort of mapping out all the potential sources of authority, and we hope to release that in the next couple of months. But yeah, that's at least two that we've talked about. Whichever legal authority is relied on, and the city could well rely on multiple sources of authority. We're almost certain to see it challenged by Northwest Natural or another interest group in court. As some of you may know, Northwest Natural recently joined some other companies and groups in challenging the climate protection program that Oregon's DEQ passed. So Northwest Natural is not afraid to litigate policies it doesn't like.
I think they see the writing on the wall and they're like, really kind of hold it down.
Yeah, they're looking after their business interests, put it that way. I think we can glean a few things from what might happen with a legal challenge in Oregon by looking at the challenge that was brought to the city of Berkeley's prohibition on gas hookups. This case is called California Restaurant Association versus the city of Berkeley. It was heard in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, and the question before that court was whether Berkeley's policy was preempted by federal law, specifically the Federal Energy Policy and Conservation Act. And the argument was that the Energy Policy and Conservation Act is the sole source of regulation for the energy use of appliances. Wrap it up?
Yep. It's going to be time for the next one. We end at 3:30 and we'll start the next one at 3:35.
Okay, we've had even less time this time, but
What about the what we can do?
Yeah, jump to that.
yeah, I will get to that. I'll try and wrap it up in the next 2 minutes here. So, long story short with this court case, very favourable judgment. It will go to the Ninth Circuit. Oregon's Attorney General has submitted a brief in support of the City of Berkeley's position, essentially in support of local regulation. So that's very promising in terms of at least how the Attorney General in Oregon sees these legal issues. But, it's to be determined, what a city or county has to pass an ordinance before it can be challenged, and then we'll have a lot more clarity then. In terms of what you can do, I was going to talk about the feasibility issue that's being raised by some businesses. There's a lot of misrepresentation at the moment that a mandate would be inflexible, that there would be no exceptions. That generally hasn't been the case where it's been passed, and there's definitely ways legally and from a policy standpoint to carve out exceptions for certain commercial and industrial activities and processes that are not currently feasible economically or technically or both to electrify. And I think it would be really important, not just as individuals, to continue to talk to City Council about this and show you support for tackling building emissions, but also if you know businesses in the community that would be in support of these policies, just start talking to them. I've had a few conversations with local roasters and brewers. They've generally been pretty positive. I think, you know, often businesses are sort of instinctively adverse to new regulations, new red tape, but I'm sure there's plenty of businesses that would not really be affected by this and support taking action on climate change and protecting future generations. And the cities won't hear from them unless they're encouraged to speak up, you know. So, yeah, just to very quickly summarize, yeah, what I think should be done is, you know, talk to each other, talk to businesses, talk to council, and keep the pressure on.
We need to take action, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
So if you want to have a conversation, welcome it. And if you want to just like jump in, ask questions, comments, thoughts, whatever, we can do that. And I was just going to talk, I was given the task of just talking about like why electrification, what are the benefits and the different aspects of you know, our lives. And I'm going to look specifically at the climate impacts, the health impacts, and the economic impacts. And if it's helpful, I can just start with a quick overview of like where are we with electrification policy in the city of Eugene, and like, what does that mean? So, the city of Eugene in November of last year passed 2 motions addressing electrification. The first motion was looking at new construction. So when we're talking about electrification, it's really important, and I think these motions kind of are parallel with it, right? We're talking about 2 buckets. We're talking about new buildings, and then we're talking about existing buildings that already have fossil fuels. You know, similar with like cars, like how are we going to retrofit existing vehicles or transportation systems, and how are we going to build new ones that are not reliable? And so the city of Eugene passed one ordinance to direct staff to explore what the legal pathways are to mandating that new construction in the city to be 100% electric by January 1st, 2023, and putting the city of Eugene on track to be the first city in the state of Oregon, but one of many cities across the country that have required new electric construction. And then the second motion that they passed was to direct staff to begin thinking through a roadmap. That second piece, which is how do we retrofit existing buildings that are already hooked up to the fossil fuel system. And that motion set some different balls rolling. We just had a work session looking at the first piece around new construction on April 13th, where there was really robust conversation, and we're moving more towards how we're going to flesh out what an ordinance might look like and what the language is there. And then the second piece around the roadmap, we're going to get a report coming back to City Council in June of this year, where they will be looking at what the next 20 years will look like, and what policies will require to transition our existing buildings in the city to being run on electricity wherever possible. So, does anyone have any questions about that kind of piece of things before I jump into like the impacts and like why we're talking about electrification in the first place? Sound good? Cool. So, why electrification? The first thing we should talk about is that when we say quote-unquote natural gas, it's a symptom of a decades-long propaganda campaign that's been funded by the fossil fuel industry to rebrand methane gas as something that's clean, good for the environment, you might have heard of bridge fuel, and safe to consume. And so really when we're talking about quote-unquote natural gas, we're talking about methane gas. And the majority of that methane here in the Pacific Northwest is coming from fracking wells in the Permian Basin in the Rockies. And so y'all are probably familiar with the process of hydraulic fracturing. You've probably seen images of people's tap water lighting on fire and getting nosebleeds from breathing the air around it, right? So when we're talking about, and you've probably also heard about the Jordan Cove liquid natural gas proposed pipeline in Southern Oregon that was routed through indigenous land with impacted landowners, many streams that are critical for our local ecology, that's imposed by multiple tribes, what have you. And so a lot of people don't make the connection that from the wellhead, right, those fracking wells, to the pipeline, the final place that gas is headed is towards cities like Eugene. And so when we're talking about electrification, it can sound kind of like we're talking about like, oh, this is just like some milquetoast thing to like feel good about ourselves as like, you know, the world burns. But in reality, what we're talking about is part of a concerted strategy being driven by the climate movement to address extraction, transportation, and then where we are, consumption. And we're not talking about individual action, we're not talking about, oh, you know, go out and recycle, or oh, you know, buy yourself a new electric stove. And if you have the resources, maybe you want to, when it's talking about health impacts. But what we're really talking about is the systemic policy changes that are needed at all levels of government so that we are transitioning as fast as humanly possible and as equitably as we can from fossil fuel infrastructure and fossil gas like methane to clean, renewable electricity. And there's a lot of conversation that we could have about what constitutes clean and renewable electricity, but we might table that because I don't have 2 minutes. So that's the reason why gas is bad. Also important to note that methane has a warming potential of 80 times that of carbon dioxide. So when methane leaks from pipelines, from wellheads, from your stovetop into the atmosphere, it's driving the climate crisis. But it's also helpful to know that when you burn methane, you turn it in, or its emissions turn into carbon dioxide. So that warming potential is reduced slightly, but we know, like I said, pipelines leak, wellheads leak, everything relating to fossil fuels will at some point leak. And so it's not just the carbon dioxide that's coming from burning it, you're also getting huge amounts of this methane at the top. So that's why gas is kind of the problem, right? I've identified the problem. Now I'll talk about electrification and why it's good as far as climate goes. First and foremost, Oregon, because of our existing hydroelectric resources, which are ethically very questionable, but because of their impacts to tribal resources, because of their impacts to salmon, because of their impacts to the local ecologies, questionable. You know, and I fully believe in dam removal in certain places, and all like universal dam removal in the near future as soon as physically possible, but also considering utilizing existing energy infrastructure, especially clean energy infrastructure, as we make the transition off of fossil fuels. And so we already have an excess of hydropower that's cheap, renewable, and we are also taking steps in our state to move toward 100% renewable energy with the passage of HB 2021 in the last session, which made that investor-owned utilities in Oregon, so that's like Portland's General Electric or Pacific Power, not EWEB, a community-owned utility, but investor-owned utilities have to transition to 100% renewable energy by 2040. And the renewable energy, as defined in that bill, a little shaky in places. Biomass, non-renewable energy. But overall, what I think we can expect from that legislation, and legislation that's passed in state houses in Washington and California and other western states, is that we'll see a huge influx in investment into large-scale renewable energy generation in the next 10 to 15 years. years. And so as we already have a green grid, we already have access to, relatively cheap, reliable, renewable electricity that's only going to get better. And anytime we can unplug something that's using gas, polluting, gas coming from fracking and from pipelines, and plug it into our increasingly renewable grid, we're getting significant emissions reductions. Or recently, we got preliminary results from a forthcoming study from RMI, which is an international think tank, specifically looking at the city of Eugene. These results showed that using the EWEB's 2021 published emissions intensity, the emissions reductions for building an all-electric home was 74%, or a reduction of 30 metric tons of CO2 over a 15-year period. That's huge. I think that the equivalent of foregoing a car is about 40% of a home's emissions. So you're almost achieving the emissions reductions in new construction if you build all electric as not having 2 cars in your household, right? Really dramatic. And this isn't, specifically, this is really interesting because we're talking about a systemic policy so that home buyers in the future would be purchasing homes that were built all electric and getting that emissions reduction built in, right? We're not requesting that they spend, X amount of dollars to buy a new Tesla or whatever. Because for me, as a tenant, as someone who doesn't make a ton of money, that is completely inaccessible. I do not have the luxury to retrofit my home right now as a tenant, right? I don't have any decision-making authority over that. But if we're putting policies in place that says that all the build-out of new housing is all electric, we're baking in those emissions reductions for anyone who's going to be purchasing homes, who's going to be renting in the future. And as I'm soon talking about, we'll also be reducing impacts to their health and to their pocketbooks. So I also just mentioned here that most of the gas used in buildings is used in furnaces and hot water heaters, and there are really, really exciting technologies that are making gas furnaces and hot water heaters more relevant. Specifically, I'm talking about heat pump heaters and heat pump hot water heaters, which are highly efficient appliances that use the same kind of technology as a refrigerator, using refrigerants to pull hot or cold air out of the outside and pump it inside of your house. Heat pumps operate at 250% efficiency, which is over double, oftentimes 3 times that of the closest gas appliance. And they offer both mechanical heating and cooling. So as our climate is warming, as we saw last summer, having mechanical cooling is not just a luxury, it's a matter of life and death, especially for low-income folks, for historically marginalized folks. And so having greater investments in cooling is going to be essential, especially if we can pair that with emissions reductions and leaning into our increasingly renewable electric grid. So that's the kind of climate side of things. Anyone have any questions before I jump into health and economic impact?
What happens to zero emissions by 2025? Is that not the deadline that we're supposed to have at the moment?
I think that the IPCC report was like, I think it was like a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030.
So I think it used to, I do remember at least in 2025 when we were saying, but I guess that's just like coming up.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. The IPCC report provided prescriptions for how to achieve 1.5 or lower Celsius warming in accord with the Paris Climate Agreement. And pretty much the general consensus by scientists now is that we're sailing past 1.5 degrees Celsius. And I think you're absolutely right about the urgency. And I think the way that I hold this in my mind, as someone who's doing very niche policy work in specific venues, is that electrifying is, no matter what we do, a necessary step to take advantage of the increasingly renewable electric grid. And so if we could, wave a magic wand and turn our electric grid to be 100% renewable tomorrow, we would not be able to take advantage of that if, 50% of our homes and buildings were still burning gas directly.
We need to wake up. We need to rise up. We need to open our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now. We're on a planet that has a problem. We got to solve it, get involved and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future. And we need to start right now. Make it greener, make it greener, make it cleaner, make it cleaner, make it last, make it fast, and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. No point in waiting or hesitating. We must get wise and know our lives and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. We need to build a better future. Slow it down. And we need to start right now. When do we need to start? Now!
Think about it.
Thanks everybody for coming. Without ado, wants to have a small word with us here. I'll say, hold on a quote. Here. I wish she was here. She was here a couple years ago. Let us be the ancestors our descendants will thank. Let us be the ancestors our descendants will thank. She goes on. Across the continent, common people with uncommon courage continue their struggles to protect the land, the water, the trees on which our very lives depend. And like small tributaries joining together, forming a mighty river, their force and power grows. Let us close together knowing today that we have built that power, and we are that mighty river, and we are the change we've been waiting for. Thank you.